I stood in the driveway, staring at the packed cooler and fishing rods loaded into the bed of his truck, my suitcase sitting alone by the garage door. "You're serious right now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek just wouldn't look at me. He adjusted the straps on his gear bag for the third time, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle working beneath his skin. "Your mom said you could stay for 2 weeks. It's perfect timing," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "I've had this trip planned with the guys for months." I felt something crack inside my chest, not the dramatic, movie kind of break, but something slow and deep, like ice splitting under the weight of winter. We'd been married for 9 years. 9 years. And in all that time, we had exactly 2 weeks of actual vacation time left on our calendars combined. 2 weeks we'd been saving for years to finally take that trip to Maui we'd promised ourselves. The one we'd talked about on our honeymoon. The one I'd been counting down to since last October. "Derek, we talked about this," I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my tone. "This was our year. This was supposed to be our year." He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something worse. It was resignation. Like he'd already made peace with whatever decision he'd made, and my opinion was just an inconvenience he had to get through. "Ashley, I know," he said, running his hand through his dark hair, the same gesture he'd made for the entire decade I'd known him when he was stressed. "But Mike's divorce is final next month. This is probably the last chance we all get to just be guys before everything changes." There it was, Mike's divorce. Of course it was about Mike. Everything lately seemed to circle back to his problems, his needs, his crisis. And somehow, Derek had made it so that supporting Mike meant abandoning me. That morning, August 14th, a Tuesday that would have been utterly forgettable if I didn't know better, I'd woken up next to him feeling grateful. Grateful. That's what kills me most when I think back on it. I remember pressing my forehead against his shoulder while he slept, listening to him breathe, thinking about how lucky I was, how solid everything felt, how safe. I had no idea that by noon, I'd be driving toward my mother's house with my suitcase, watching my marriage unravel in real time, and Derek would be pointing that truck north toward Lake Tahoe with 3 of his friends and a cooler full of beer and steak. I had no idea that this decision, this single, seemingly small decision about a fishing trip, would be the first domino in a line that stretched so far into the future, I couldn't even see where it ended. We met in college, Derek and I. He was a business major with a crooked smile and terrible taste in music. I was studying marketing, and we'd both ended up at the same awful networking event our junior year. He'd spent the entire first half of the conversation trying to impress me by name-dropping companies he'd read about in Forbes. By the second half, he'd given up the act and just made me laugh by doing terrible impressions of our professor. That was Derek, the kind of guy who could fake it for a little while, but eventually he'd just be himself. And for 9 years, I'd loved that version of him. We'd built something real. A 3-bedroom house in Riverside, California, with a white picket fence that Derek had painted himself, badly, the summer after we bought it. I worked as a marketing director for a tech startup downtown, making good money, benefits, the whole package. Derek ran his own HVAC contracting business, nothing fancy, but steady work that kept us comfortable. We'd saved $37,000 for the Maui trip. $37,000. We had the dates blocked off on both our work calendars. I'd even bought new luggage with little tropical patterns on it 3 months ago, and every time I saw it in the closet, I'd felt this little spark of anticipation. Life had been good. The kind of good that feels normal when you're living it, but that you recognize as a gift the moment it starts slipping away. We had friends over for barbecues. We took weekend trips to San Diego. We had sex regularly, laughed at the same jokes, had inside references from shows we'd watched together. Derek would leave little notes in my lunch sometimes. Nothing profound, just "love you," or a dumb pun that would make me groan. We'd fallen into the kind of comfortable rhythm that people spend their whole lives searching for. The kind that makes you believe you're going to make it. Then, about 6 months ago, Mike's marriage started falling apart. Mike was Derek's oldest friend. They'd known each other since elementary school, and they'd been in the same friend group ever since. His wife, Jennifer, had been caught messaging her personal trainer in ways that went way beyond discussing deadlifts. Mike had found out, confronted her, and everything had exploded from there. The divorce had been brutal. Custody battles, arguments about the house, all of it. And Derek had become Mike's unofficial therapist. At first, it was fine. I got it. Your best friend's life implodes. You show up. Derek would meet him for lunch a couple times a week, would listen to him vent about the legal fees and the unfairness of it all. I'd even encouraged it. He needs you, I'd told Derek, and I'd meant it. But somewhere along the way, showing up had turned into Derek canceling plans we'd made, staying out until midnight on a Thursday because Mike needed to talk, spending his lunch breaks driving to Mike's apartment instead of coming home. And now this. A fishing trip. 2 weeks before our vacation. A vacation we'd been planning since our honeymoon. A vacation that represented something bigger than just time off work. It represented the idea that our marriage was a priority, that we were a team, that sometimes the people you love get to come first. I didn't make a scene in the driveway. I didn't yell or cry or throw his fishing rods into the street like some people might have. Instead, I just nodded quietly, picked up my suitcase, and carried it to my car. "Have fun," I said, and I meant it to sound casual, but it came out hollow. Derek reached for my arm, and I almost let him touch me. Almost. But I pulled away just in time and climbed into the driver's seat. As I was backing out of the driveway, I saw him standing there in the rearview mirror, that same expression of resignation on his face, like he'd already moved on from this moment, like I was just another inconvenience he had to manage. The drive to my mother's house in Orange County took 90 minutes, and I spent most of it wondering when exactly my marriage had stopped being something Derek fought for. I wondered when I'd become so easy to leave behind. My mother's house smelled like it always did, lavender sachets and the faint tang of vinegar from her endless garden projects. She was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, her hands already reaching for my suitcase before I'd even turned off the engine. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and I knew she could see it all over my face. The crack, the fracture, everything breaking. I'm not going to say my mother is easy to talk to. Linda Chen has opinions about everything. Your career choices, your haircut, the way you fold fitted sheets. She'd never particularly warmed to Derek, though she'd been polite about it for 9 years. "He has kind eyes," she'd said once, which in my mother's language meant she found him fundamentally boring but acceptable. Now, standing in her driveway with my tropical luggage and my husband's rejection still fresh like a wound, I wondered what she'd say. I wondered if she'd been waiting for this moment, if some part of her had known this was coming before I did. "Let's get you inside," she said, already pulling my suitcase toward the front door. "I made your favorite, chicken with black bean sauce." The kitchen was exactly as I remembered it. Small, immaculate, every spice jar labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. She'd been a chef's assistant for 15 years before she retired, and cooking was her love language. She pressed me into a chair at the wooden table and started heating things up without asking if I was hungry. I wasn't. My stomach felt like it was lined with concrete. But I watched her move around the kitchen, her small, efficient movements, the way she knew where everything was without thinking, and I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly. "Tell me what happened," she said, setting down a plate of steaming chicken and rice in front of me. So I did. I told her about the fishing trip, about Mike's divorce, about the Maui tickets that were now completely non-refundable and would expire in 43 days. I told her about the suitcase sitting alone by the garage door, about Derek's resignation, about the way he wouldn't look at me. I told her everything except the part that scared me most, the part where I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like a priority to him. My mother listened without interrupting. She just sat across from me, occasionally pushing the plate closer to encourage me to eat, her dark eyes steady on my face. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. "He's always been weak," she said finally. "Not in a mean way. Just weak. The kind of man who needs someone else's crisis to feel important." "Mom, I'm not being cruel, I'm being accurate. I'm—" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You've been carrying that marriage, Ashley. You just didn't want to see it." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to defend Derek, to explain that he was a good man, that he loved me, that this was just a moment of poor judgment. But something about the way she said it made me pause, made me think about all those canceled plans, all those nights he'd stayed out late with Mike, all those times I'd reorganized my own schedule to fit around his emergencies. "What do you want to do?" my mother asked. "I don't know," I said. "I don't even know how long I'm supposed to stay here. Derek said 2 weeks, but—" "2 weeks is what he said, because that's how long he's calculated he needs for you to cool down and come back," my mother said flatly. "That's not a solution. That's a Band-Aid." She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of anything more permanent than 2 weeks made my chest tighten with panic. Separation? Divorce? Those were words for other people. People whose marriages had been broken in obvious ways. Derek and I didn't have an obvious break. We had a slow bleed. We had a man who'd started choosing his friend over his wife so gradually that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom. The twin bed with the white iron headboard. The desk where I'd done homework in high school. The bookshelf still lined with my college textbooks and old yearbooks. And I couldn't sleep. My phone kept lighting up with notifications. Derek had texted me 3 times. "Made it to the cabin safely. Miss you? Call me when you get a chance?" I didn't respond to any of them. By Wednesday, Derek's texts had shifted. They were shorter, less apologetic. "Your mom's garden looks like it could use some attention. You should help her out." The casual dismissal of it made my blood boil. He wasn't even trying anymore. He wasn't even pretending this bothered him. My mother found me on Thursday morning, sitting in her backyard with a coffee, staring at the garden like it had personally wronged me. The tomatoes were overgrown. The basil had gone to seed. The weeds had taken over half the vegetable beds. It was chaos. It was exactly the kind of tangible problem I could actually solve, unlike the intangible disaster of my marriage. "Come on," my mother said, appearing beside me with gardening gloves and a pair of pruning shears. "Let's make it beautiful again." We worked all morning. The California sun beat down on us relentlessly, and I felt sweat dripping down my back, dirt under my fingernails, my muscles burning from pulling weeds and turning soil. It was exhausting. It was also the first time in days that I hadn't felt like I was drowning. By Friday, my mother had made calls. Quiet calls. The kind where she closed herself in her bedroom and spoke in rapid Mandarin to people I didn't recognize. When she came out, she told me she'd arranged for me to have lunch with someone. "An old friend," she said vaguely. "Someone who might have some perspective." The friend turned out to be Patricia Wong, a woman about my mother's age who worked as a divorce attorney. We met at a small cafe in Orange County, and Patricia ordered tea while my mother excused herself to the bathroom, a transparent setup that would have been funny if it hadn't been so calculated. "Your mother is worried about you," Patricia said, getting straight to the point. "She wanted me to explain your options." I almost walked out. I almost told Patricia that I didn't need options, that Derek and I were just taking some space, that everything was going to be fine. But something made me stay. Something made me ask her to explain anyway. Patricia pulled out a small folder. She'd apparently come prepared, and started laying out the facts with the same clinical precision my mother had used about the garden. Community property, spousal support, the importance of documentation. She talked about credit scores and 401k divisions, and how California law would split our assets if things came to that. "I'm not saying you need to do anything right now," Patricia said, "but you should know what your rights are. You should know what happens if this doesn't work out." My hands were shaking as I took the folder from her. The weight of it felt like a confession. like I was admitting that my marriage might actually be over. "One more thing," Patricia said as we were leaving. "Document everything. Texts, emails, any conversations about finances or promises he makes. Not because I think you're going to need it, but because if you do, you'll be grateful you have it." I started documenting everything that afternoon. I opened a new email account, one Derek didn't know about. I created a Google Drive folder and began saving screenshots of every text message he sent me, every financial statement, every promise he'd made about Maui. I went through my phone and pulled up our text conversation from when he'd first brought up the fishing trip, and I saved that too. It felt paranoid. It felt like betrayal. It also felt like the first time I'd protected myself in years. By Monday, 10 days into my stay at my mother's house, Derek called. Not texted. An actual phone call. "Babe, we need to talk about this," he said. I could hear the lake in the background, water lapping against the dock. He was still there. Still fishing while I was sitting in my mother's kitchen, drowning. "I'm listening," I said. "I miss you. I hate that you're upset. But I also don't understand why you're making this into such a big deal. It's just a fishing trip. It's not like I'm leaving you." The words hit me like a slap. "Derek, you canceled our honeymoon do-over. You canceled the vacation we've been saving for years. You chose your friend over me." "That's not fair," he said. And I heard the edge in his voice now, the defensive tone, the one that meant he'd made peace with his decision, and now I was just being unreasonable. "Mike is going through hell right now. I can't just abandon him." "You abandoned me," I said quietly. There was silence on the other end of the line. "When are you coming home?" he asked finally. I looked at my mother, who was pretending not to listen while very clearly listening to every word. I thought about Patricia's folder. I thought about all the ways I'd made myself small to fit into Derek's life. I thought about the vacation I'd been counting down to since October. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ashley, come on. 2 weeks was the plan. Your mom said 2 weeks. My mom said a lot of things. I'm figuring out what I need to say." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to clarity. My mother set a cup of tea in front of me. "You're starting to see it now," she said. It wasn't a question. "See what?" "That you have more power than you think you do." I stared at the tea, watching the steam rise, and I realized she was right. For the first time in 10 days, I wasn't waiting for Derek to fix this. I wasn't waiting for him to come home and apologize and make everything right. I was starting to think about what I actually wanted, and that terrified me more than anything else. The 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. Derek called on day 21, and I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. "Ashley, this has gone on long enough. When are you coming home?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I asked him a question that stopped him cold. "Have you talked to Mike about what happened?" Silence. "Because I did. I called him yesterday." This was the moment. The moment I'd been building toward since that afternoon. Patricia had handed me the folder. I'd spent the last 2 weeks documenting everything. Every text, every canceled plan, every promise Derek had made and broken. But more than that, I'd done something my mother had suggested. I'd called Mike. Mike answered on the second ring, surprised to hear from me. We'd never been particularly close, but we were friendly enough. I didn't do accusations. I didn't do anger. I just asked him directly, "Mike, did you ask Derek to cancel our Maui trip so he could go fishing with you?" The pause told me everything I needed to know. "Ashley, he started, but I cut him off. "Just answer the question." "No," he said finally. But Derek mentioned the trip was coming up, and I was really struggling. I needed my friends right now. I didn't think it was a big deal. "You didn't think," I repeated. "You didn't think that Derek canceling a 9-year marriage priority was a big deal?" "Ashley, come on. It's just a fishing trip. It's not like—" I hung up on him. Then I called Derek back. "I talked to Mike," I said. "He admitted that you both knew about Maui. He admitted that he was struggling, and you decided that his struggle mattered more than 9 years of marriage. That's not what happened, Derek said. But his voice had changed. The resignation was gone. Now there was just panic. Ashley, you're twisting this. I can explain. Explain what, exactly? That you lied to me? That you made a conscious choice to put his divorce above our marriage? That you thought 2 weeks with your mom would just reset everything and I'd come home and forget about it? I was standing in my mother's kitchen. She was sitting at the table, pretending to read the newspaper, but very clearly listening to every word. When she caught my eye, she nodded. Small, encouraging. I want you to understand something, I said to Derek, and my voice was steady now, clearer than it had been in weeks. I'm not angry that you went fishing. I'm angry that you lied about why. I'm angry that you thought so little of me, that you believed I'd accept the sacrifice of our vacation without question, and I'm angry that it took me 3 weeks to realize I deserve better than that. Ashley, please. I love you. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I know you love me, I said. But loving someone and prioritizing them are two different things. And you haven't prioritized me in months. That was Wednesday. On Thursday, Derek came to my mother's house. He showed up unannounced, which told me he was serious. My mother let him in with the expression of someone greeting a condemned man, and she very deliberately left the room to give us privacy, which was so unlike her that I knew she was making a statement. Derek looked terrible. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were red-rimmed. He'd driven 90 minutes without calling first because he was desperate, and desperation looked bad on him. I talked to Mike, he said immediately. I told him he was wrong. I told him that I was wrong. I told him that I chose his crisis over my marriage, and that was unforgivable. What did he say? He apologized. He said he was being selfish, that he shouldn't have let me sacrifice something that important. He said he's going to therapy, and he thinks I should too, because apparently I have some codependency issues with trying to fix other people's problems. I sat down at my mother's kitchen table. Derek stood across from me, and the space between us felt wider than 90 miles. I love you, he said. I don't want to lose you. Love isn't enough, I said, and I meant it. Trust is. Respect is. Showing up for each other is. And right now, I don't trust that you're going to make me a priority. Then tell me what I have to do. Tell me how to fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized that he still didn't understand. He thought this was something he could fix with the right apology or gesture. He thought love could overcome the fact that he'd actively, deliberately chosen someone else. I think we need to talk to someone, I said. A therapist. Not just you, but both of us, together. He nodded so quickly, I thought his head might snap off. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'll find someone today. I'll make an appointment. And Derek? I held up my hand. I'm not coming home yet. I'm going to stay here for another 2 weeks. I need time to think about what I want, and I can't do that while you're there, trying to fix things. How long? He asked, and I heard the fear underneath the question. How long until you forgive me? How long until you decide to stay? I don't know yet, I said. That's the point. He left an hour later, and I watched him walk to his truck from my mother's porch. He looked smaller than he had before, diminished. Part of me wanted to run after him, to tell him it would all be okay, to fall back into the comfortable lie of our marriage. But I didn't. I stood there, watching him drive away, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't healing. It wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. My mother appeared beside me with 2 cups of tea. You did the right thing, she said. How do you know? Because you didn't take him back. We spent the next 2 weeks in a strange holding pattern. Derek texted me the name of a marriage counselor he'd found. He sent me photos of the garden he'd started in our backyard. Apparently, he decided that if I wasn't coming home, he was going to do some projects around the house. He sent me the receipt for the Maui hotel, showing that he'd successfully disputed the cancellation and gotten a full refund. $37,000 was coming back to us. I didn't respond to most of it. I just let it exist in the space between us while I worked in my mother's garden, made plans with an old college friend I'd lost touch with, and went to a few therapy sessions on my own. My therapist, Dr. Morrison, was a woman in her 60s who didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Why did you stay in the marriage this long?" she asked during our second session. "Because I loved him." That's not an answer. A lot of people love people who don't serve their highest good. Try again. I sat with that question for a long moment. Because I was afraid of being alone. Because I'd built an entire identity around being a good wife. Because admitting that the marriage was failing felt like admitting that I'd failed. And now? Now I'm starting to think that staying in a marriage where I'm not a priority is also a kind of failure. A failure to myself. On day 35, I went home. Not to stay, just to get my things and have a serious conversation with Derek. He'd cleaned the house obsessively. The kitchen was spotless. The laundry was done. There were fresh flowers on the dining room table. It was all very nice and very desperate. "I made an appointment with Dr. Chen," he said before I'd even put down my purse. "First session is next Tuesday. I've been reading books about codependency. I called Mike and told him he needs to set better boundaries with me, that I can't be his emotional support system anymore." Derek, stop. I held up my hand. "I appreciate all of this, I do. But I need you to understand that you can't fix this with grand gestures or self-help books. You have to actually change, and change takes time." "I know, I understand that." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you think you can apologize and everything goes back to normal. But we don't get to go back to normal. We have to build something new, and I'm not sure I want to." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need you to hear me. I don't know if I can stay in this marriage. I don't know if I want to. Right now, I'm considering a separation." The word hung in the air between us like a blade. Separation. The first real acknowledgement that we might not make it. "For how long?" he asked. "I don't know. 3 months? 6 months? Long enough for both of us to figure out if we actually want to be married to each other, or if we're just afraid of being alone." Derek sat down heavily on the couch. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. If that's what you need, then that's what we'll do." We spent the next hour going through logistics. He would stay in the house. I would find an apartment. My mother offered, but I declined. I needed my own space. We would split our finances 50-50 during the separation. We would continue with therapy. We would tell our families. Telling my mother was easy. She'd already packed my things and was waiting by the door with a list of apartments in my price range. Telling Derek's mother was harder. Carol called me in tears, begging me to reconsider, insisting that Derek was a good man and that I was being too harsh. I listened patiently, and then I told her the truth. "Carol, I love Derek, but I can't be married to someone who doesn't prioritize me. And right now, he's choosing to change, which is good. But I need to know that it's real before I commit to staying." The apartment I found was small, a one-bedroom in Long Beach, with a view of the parking lot and rent that ate up a significant chunk of my savings. But it was mine. I set up my bed, hung my clothes in the closet, and for the first time in 9 years, I went to sleep in a place where I was the only one making decisions about what happened next. The separation lasted 5 months. During that time, Derek and I went to therapy together every Tuesday. We worked through his codependency issues. We worked through my tendency to minimize my own needs. We worked through 9 years of accumulated resentments and hurt, and the slow, steady erosion of partnership. Dr. Chen was different from Dr. Morrison. Where Morrison challenged me, Chen held space for both of us. She didn't judge Derek for his choices. She just asked him to examine them. She didn't validate me blindly. She asked me to look at my own role in the dynamic. "You made it very easy for him to prioritize other people," Dr. Chen said to me in one session. "You adjusted your life around his needs so seamlessly that he never had to consider what he was asking of you." "So it's my fault?" I asked. hearing the defensiveness in my voice. It's not about fault, it's about pattern. You taught him, through your actions, that he could rely on you to always be flexible, and he learned that lesson very well. By month 4, something had shifted. Derek was different. Not perfect. He still had his tendencies toward people-pleasing and codependency, but he was trying. He was conscious of his choices. He asked me questions about my day. He listened to my answers. He started saying no to Mike more often. And slowly, I started to miss him. On day 137 of our separation, Derek called me at work. "I booked something," he said. "A weekend at a bed and breakfast in Napa, just for us. No phones, no distractions. I want to see if we can find our way back to each other." I should have said no. I should have told him we needed more time. But instead, I said yes. The bed and breakfast was beautiful, all exposed beams and wine country charm. We spent the first night barely talking, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. On the second morning, Derek took my hand. "I want to come home," I said before he could speak. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was when I left. And I don't want to be. I want to be the person who knows her own worth. I want to be the person who says no when something doesn't serve her. I want to be the person who isn't afraid to leave if she has to." "I know," Derek said. "And I want to be the person who makes sure you never have to." We moved slowly back into the house together. I didn't move all my things back at once. I tested the waters. I spent a few nights at the house, then went back to my apartment. I wanted to make sure that this wasn't just nostalgia or habit pulling me back. But by month 6, I knew. And on a Tuesday evening in March, 9 months after that terrible day in the driveway, Derek and I sat down with Dr. Chen for what was supposed to be our final session. "Where do you want to go from here?" she asked us. Derek looked at me. I looked at him. And for the first time in a year, I felt like we were actually on the same side. "I want to stay," I said. "But differently. I want to renegotiate our marriage. I want to set boundaries. I want to make sure that when the next crisis comes, and it will, we handle it as a team." "I want that too," Derek said. "And I want to take you to Maui. I know the original dates have passed, but I don't care. Whenever you're ready, we're going." We did go to Maui, eventually. 6 months later, in September. We sat on the beach where we'd honeymooned, and I felt something that I hadn't felt in years. I felt safe. Not in the way I'd felt safe before. That comfortable, unconscious safety that comes from not knowing what you're risking. But a real safety, the kind that comes from choosing, every single day, to show up for each other. The marriage isn't perfect now. Derek still struggles with codependency sometimes. I still struggle with minimizing my own needs. But we work on it. We go to therapy. We check in with each other. And most importantly, we've learned that love, by itself, isn't enough. You also need respect, honesty, and the willingness to fight for the other person's well-being, even when it's hard. My mother asked me once if I regretted staying in the marriage. "I regret wasting a year being angry," I told her. "But I don't regret fighting for it. Because Derek was worth fighting for. He just needed to learn what that meant." Sometimes I think about that fishing trip. About how a single decision, one that seemed small at the time, nearly destroyed everything we'd built. And I think about how grateful I am that I had the strength to leave, even temporarily. Because leaving was what made me realize I wanted to stay. And staying, on my own terms, is what saved us both.